Hi guys, thanks for joining me on the second part of cognitive biases and how that affects your Dota making decisions. I was piggybacking off this Business Insider article that talked about mostly how cognitive biases can screw up your financial decisions, and this is the second part focusing on the last 10 of this article. So the first important one I thought was outcome bias, judging a decision based on the outcome rather than how exactly the decision was made in the moment. Just because you won a lot in Vegas doesn't mean gambling your money was a smart decision. This one is super common in some of my Q&A sessions. I do Q&A decently often at the end of my streams, and a very common question is, oh, what do you think about Battle Fury on Wind Ranger? I think this is a really good build. I just won 10 games in a row with it. And Battle Fury was actually a build in Dota 1, so it's not that outlandish, but people ask me seemingly ridiculous things, and I'm like, wow, how can someone possibly think that Battle Fury is good on Wind Ranger? And from my view, it just looks ludicrous. And from their point of view, they actually think it's a good build because they won 5 or 10 games with it. And this is outcome bias. You're judging your decision to get a Battle Fury, and you're thinking that it's a good idea because you ended up winning the game. And just because you won the game doesn't mean that the Battle Fury was a good decision. Why did you get a Battle Fury? Why did you spend 4,100 gold on that instead of on something else, or however much it costs now with the Quelling Blade? Or like if you're a Spectre, oh, I think Vanguard's really good on Spectre now. You know, it got buffed in the last patch and it synergizes super well with with this, that, and something else. But you're not thinking about the flaws of the item build. Like I could have used this 2,000 gold to buy an urn and then save up and get really close to my relic. I could have just, if I really needed the sustain, I could have just gotten, a couple of mangoes that could have lasted me 10-15 minutes, and I could have got my radiance 5 minutes faster. You're not thinking about the flaws of the decision build and like how things could have turned out if you made a different decision. You're not evaluating it properly. You're just using the end outcome of you winning the game to justify the decision of getting a particular item. Let's see. Next one is overconfident. Some of us are too confident about our abilities, and this causes us to take greater risk in our daily lives. Experts are more prone to this bias than lay people, since they are more convinced they are right. And people in general are too overconfident about their abilities, and a very often cited thing is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. If you haven't heard about this, it's a cognitive bias wherein relatively unskilled individuals suffer from illusory superiority, mistakenly assessing their ability to be much higher than is accurate. And their research also suggests that conversely, highly skilled individuals may underestimate their relative competence, erroneously assuming that tasks that are easy for them also are easy for others. So generally what it's saying, that if you think that you're better than you actually are, or people that aren't that skilled generally think they're much better than they actually are, and people that are really, really good think that they're worse than they actually are. And this miscalibration of the incompetent stems from an error about the self, whereas a miscalibration of the highly competent stems from an error about others. So in general, it's like, okay, I see the game this way. Let's just say there's a very advanced player that sees this game this way. He assumes that everyone else sees the game this way, and therefore he's just average, when he's actually super, super good. And someone who's not very good, they don't know anything about the game, and they tend to mistakenly think that they're really, really good about the game, even though they don't know any of the nuances. And this is a super, super common thing. People always think that they're better than they actually are. Oh, I'm actually supposed to be 500 MMR if I didn't get crap teammates every game, whereas you're not really concentrating on like why do you think you're actually better than you are. And it's an illusory superiority that happens all the time. This is probably the most relevant one to Dota, actually. So if you realize that, hey, maybe my MMR is actually correct, I'm at this rating, how can I improve? That's a much better attitude and mentality, I think, than thinking that you're actually better than you are, because then you think that you don't really have to improve. You're just being brought down by whatever illusions you mistake that's keeping you from your true rating. The next one is stereotyping. Expecting a group or person to have certain qualities without having real information about the person. It allows us to quickly identify strangers as friends or enemies, but people tend to overuse and abuse it. Initially, I thought this didn't really relate to Dota, but then I realized that I make this mistake fairly often in Dota. I see this like anti-mage pick, and I assume that it's going to be a safe lane farming anti-mage who goes Battle Fury into Vlad's, into Manta with treads along the way. And me having this preconceived notion that all anti-mage players are going to play like this just completely destroyed me one particular game. I was playing against Mind Control, and he was anti-mage, and he was roaming at level 1, and he killed the chicken in mid, and I was just like, what is this guy doing? And he actually ganked a couple of the lanes. And me having this preconceived notion that he was a typical, stereotypical AM player that just farmed for 25 minutes and then decided to own at the end, that just completely like owned us and made us lose the first 20 minutes of the game very, very heavily. So I didn't think that initially it applied to Dota, but I realized that I make this mistake pretty often about how I assume a particular player will play because of the hero that they've chosen. Next one is survivorship bias, an error that comes from focusing only on surviving examples, causing us to misjudge a situation. For instance, we might think that being an entrepreneur is easy because we haven't heard of all of those who failed. An easy example that I would like to cite is being a professional player. People think that it's fairly easy to become a professional player because I get questions all the time. Oh, you know, I think I'm 5K, I can be pro. And people have this mentality that they can be pro. Even 4K players think that they can be pro, and they see all these people. They're like, "Oh, I can do this. I can play. I can play at this level." They watch professional games like, "Oh, this guy made a lot of mistakes. I can play better than that." Instead of looking at the tens of players that actually make a living off of playing Dota, you should think about the hundreds, maybe even thousands, that have failed to make a living playing Dota. There are 7K players that have played and they have failed to be good at Dota in a competitive sense. And there are many, many more 6K players that have tried to become a professional player in Dota and who have failed. And how many 4K and 5K players do you think have tried to make a living in Dota and become a professional player and just have that completely fail? And they're thinking about the small sample size that has actually survived the test to become a good competitive player, whereas this huge pool of thousands and thousands of players that have failed aren't really on their mind. And this bias allows them to think that they can actually be a professional player when only such a tiny, tiny, minuscule amount of players can actually become professional. And there's a couple of small other ones that I wanted to talk about. Pro-innovation bias. When a proponent of an innovation tends to overvalue its usefulness and undervalue its limitations. Sound familiar, Silicon Valley? I think a really recent example of this was secret picking Elder Titan at ESL 1 New York. People are like, oh, they probably thought that they overvalued its usefulness because they were being innovative and undervalued its limitations. They didn't really concentrate on the flaws of the hero, which is like natural order and not being very useful because of low amounts of high agility heroes like Morphling and Terrorblade, and you know, Stomp not being that easy to hit because you can't do that trick with the Spirit anymore. You know, there are a lot of things that don't make this hero very, very useful, and they undervalued its limitations and overvalued its usefulness, and that caused them to lose a game. Recency, the tendency to weigh the latest information more heavily than older data. This actually probably is very relevant to betting, I would say. Like, people think that, oh, teams are on a hot streak. They're actually much better than they are. They lost 10 games and they won 3. And you concentrate, oh man, this team won 3 games in a row. They're awesome. As opposed to looking at their overall record, which is 3-10. And then selective perception is kind of like fan bias. I would say not terribly relevant. And the one that I wanted to cite that wasn't on here is negative perceptions by others influencing your Dota play. And this is somewhat relevant to me because I'm a streamer, and when I make a play that's going to make me look stupid, I'm okay with it because I'm trying to make a decision that is going to end up winning the game. That's what I want to do into it. I want to win the game. I don't care about making myself look like a fool. I don't care about dying 20 times. I don't care about doing this play that just like completely flops. If it was in an effort to win the game and I thought that it could increase my chances of winning the game, then I'm okay with doing that. And I think far too many people concentrate on the negative perception of others. Oh, this guy died 15 times, hence he's bad. Or you got caught out solo, hence that is a very, very bad play. And the negative perception by others, I think, really like hinders people from taking risks in Dota. And you do need to take a lot of risks in Dota, but dying has this like overly negative stigma surrounding it, when dying is an integral part of Dota and oftentimes very necessary to win a game. So overall, I encourage you to try and remove yourself from the situation, think about your cognitive biases, and hopefully overcome them to improve your play and your MMR in the future. So thank you guys for watching this. I'll post a link in the article if you want to read it yourself in the YouTube description link. Thank you guys. Have a good one.